Welcome to the Children in Scotland podcast. In this episode, Chris Ross from our Policy, Projects and Participation team is in conversation with Lucy Johnson from Enquire. They discuss the independent review of exams and assessments, the work of the Inclusion Ambassadors, and the Success Looks Different Awards, and talk to some of the Inclusion Ambassadors to hear their views on exams.
Scottish education is in a period of ongoing reflection and reform. The Scottish Government has outlined their intention to reform the qualifications and assessment system and have asked Professor Louise Hayward to lead an independent review of qualifications and assessment. According to the Scottish Government, the intention of this reform process is to ensure that all learners' achievements are fairly recognised and to afford every learner an enhanced and fair opportunity to demonstrate the breadth, depth and relevance of their learning. The review has been driven by various other strands of work, including Angela Morgan's independent review of the implementation of additional support for learning, and Professor Ken Muir's Putting the Learners at the Centre report. It's also been necessitated by challenges in the delivery of exams and assessments throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and the experiences young people had during this time. Professor Hayward's review is now well underway. Between November 2022 and January 2023, there was a public consultation and further engagement to develop the future system is expected. Interest in the review has been high, and children and young people continue to share their views on what matters to them in this area. In today's episode of the Children in Scotland podcast, we're going to explore the experience of qualifications and assessments from the perspective of young people who access additional support for learning. Drawn on work from the Inclusion Ambassadors and the recent Success Looks Different Award, we will look at what some of the challenges are for young people, but also what we can learn from different approaches that value different forms of success. There are going to be two main contributors to today's discussion on the podcast. I'm Chris Ross, Senior Policy, Projects and Participation Officer at Children in Scotland.
And I'm Lucy Johnson, Senior Children's Rights Officer for Enquire, which provides advice and information about additional support for learning, helping schools and families work together to ensure children get the right support in school. And as part of this service, we run Reach, which provides advice for children and young people who may need extra help with their learning. Enquire is managed by Children in Scotland, so it offers a lot of opportunities to cross over in the work that we do.
In 2021, the group developed a vision statement for additional support for learning. This informs all of our work with the group, and we revisit it regularly with them. It links really closely to all their work on exams and assessments as well. Their vision is that school should help me be the best that I can be. School is a place where children and young people learn, socialise and become prepared for life beyond school. Success is different for everyone, but it is more important that all the adults that children and young people come into contact with in school get to know them as individuals. They should ask, listen and act on what young people say about the support that works best for them. Lucy, you're going to talk a little bit about the Success Looks Different Awards later as well, which is built directly from this vision statement. So, the first area we're actually going to talk about a bit today, Lucy, is the experience of the young people in relation to exams and assessments, and mostly the views of the Inclusion Ambassadors.
How do exams make you feel?
Scared. Feel like I'm weak. They make me very, very, very scared.
What struck you from our work with that group about exams and assessments, Lucy?
I think the first thing to really make a point of saying is that the Inclusion Ambassadors fully understand why there needs to be exams. They recognise the importance of assessments to see how everyone's doing, and they appreciate that they're part of their school life. However, for a lot of the group, and we have talked about this with them a lot, is that they find the idea of exams stressful. They've shared with us the different words they kind of associate with exams, and they're things like anxious, stressed, isolated, frustrated, worried. You know, the list sort of goes on. And collectively, they've shared quite a few examples with us about their experiences of exams themselves. One member of the group has said how they were excited at the prospect at first of exams, but then quickly realised how big of a workload exams can be, and that sort of started making them feel quite stressed and frustrated about feeling underprepared. And I think another one that really stood out for me as well, another example from one of the members, was the worry that's attached to making people happy with your results, and maybe feeling like you're not good enough if you don't get the results that you want to get or somebody else wants you to get.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me as well, there's so much in there, but yeah, it was so obvious, I think, discussing with them the impact it can have on their health and well-being, right? And that's both in terms of all the stuff you've described about how they feel, the anxiety and the kind of the stress that can go with that, but also the impact it has on their, the amount of time that they're having to take outside of their school life to prepare for stuff, and it's having that real knock-on effect on, I guess, just their general experience of being young people, right? Like exams are one part of that, and it feels like that there is that real stress, and people just still associate it with that. And to me, that feels like that we need to kind of tackle that to change, I guess, just the pressure and the kind of the overarching stuff that goes with it, that I guess the associations that people almost have with exams. I think the other thing that I thought was, or I guess that to me that sticks out with all of that, is that for some of the group, they're not necessarily actually going to be involved in exams, but they can feel that pressure around the school already. And clearly it becomes like it's just such a big part of school life. And I think that's always something that strikes me as just the kind of almost that pervasive feeling of the way it seeps into all the other aspects of school life. And I think we've spoken at different points with them, haven't we, about they feel, I guess, almost that they feel like they're being assessed on things that aren't relevant to the real world, and then they miss out on stuff that they want to learn about. And so for some of the group, that is things like being able to travel independently, which are not, there's not that much work, it feels like, done to understand people's progress and all those sort of independent living skills that are really, really important for lots of people as they leave school.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things that members of the group who maybe have left school now and they've come back to meetings, they're still part of the inclusion ambassadors, have really reflected on, in that there was so much emphasis, like you said, on taking exams, doing exams, whether it was them or if it was just other people in their year group. There was a real emphasis on it. But since they've left, they've not really seen the benefit of the exams, because, like you mentioned there, it's more important to them to be able to access public transport in order to get to their job, or it's more important to understand the pay slip that they've received or understand how the tax is working. And they feel like they maybe didn't get enough of that when they were at school, because this focus on exams took front and centre.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Brooklyn, how do you feel about exams in school?
Well, I think exams are important, but it's not as important as people think they are.
Why do you think that, Brooklyn?
Because on some college applications, it would say like, you need this, you need that, but someone's like, you don't really need anything, you just need to have a good positive attitude. So I think that as long as you know what you're doing and have a good idea of how you're doing it, I think exams should really be a thing.
And I think the other thing with the stressful aspect of it for me that always seems to come up is that there's just still so much pressure on like one time of year, right? That everything builds up to May or June, or to that sort of May, June exam diet, and a little bit around the prelims as well. But that everything becomes so driven towards that, and it puts so much stress into quite a short period of time. Eve, you've just done your prelims. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that felt?
Yeah, so I think it felt good at the start, where it's like you kind of had some like good adrenaline, and then when you're in it and it's all people spoke about for a while, so it was stressful. And then like when you went home from school, it was all like, okay, study now and do this. But I think now that they're over, you kind of have a bit of like, oh, okay, well that happened and it wasn't as bad as you thought.
Yeah, and I think there's something there about the group have talked about how exams happen kind of, they're of the moment. They don't feel relevant in the real world because they're about remembering something in that moment. And there's so much build up to it. And I think, I can't remember who it was, but someone was talking about this recently, about how they didn't feel like they were good at remembering. So therefore they were never going to be good at exams because they can't remember. But it doesn't mean that they don't understand, and it doesn't mean that they can't access that particular subject. It just means they can't access it in a way that exams presents the subject that they were learning.
Yeah, I think, well, within our work to feed all that into the review being led at the moment by Professor Hayward, we have, I guess, pointed that out, and with the group, haven't we, about the need, I guess, for those more flexible approaches that allow for more ongoing assessment. And I guess there've been a bit more choice for people within that about what works for them, because, as you say, for some of the group, the issue of almost remembering what the exam is meant to be about, but there's also the stress and anxiety build up, I guess, of the lead up to the exam, and then sitting in that space, it just can be very overwhelming for a lot of young people, I think. And so we need to find ways that allow people to be assessed in ways that work for them, I think, or certainly that's what we hear a lot from the inclusion ambassadors. Because I guess what's also important to remember here is that we don't just, Children in Scotland have done lots of work with children and young people about exams who are not necessarily accessing additional support. And for a lot of people, exams do work well; they work fine. But it's about how you can be a bit more flexible within that. I think that's really important.
Yeah, definitely. I think you definitely brought that up in the sense of being given more choice on how they want to be assessed, and also more of a realization that maybe pupils with additional support needs don't follow such a traditional path that's expected at a lot of schools, in that you do your exams to get into further education, and that maybe there should be more choice to reflect the fact that some pupils will be taking a different path once they leave school, and it won't matter as much about exam results, but ultimately there are other things that they could be doing that would be more beneficial to them as they transition from school into the workplace or potentially further education or wherever it is that they choose to go next.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot in there, isn't there, as well, about actually what do we value? Well, there's one part of this is the exam system, right, and the structure that goes around it and how and when you can be assessed. But there's also what you value. And I think a lot of the group almost is like, I guess that feeling of, I think this is what came out really strongly in in Angela Morgan's independent review of additional support for learning about what we value and what we measure. But there's almost a feeling of, like, I guess, othering of, if you're not going to be getting 5 hires in 5th year, then you've not succeeded and you've not done well. And so you can tinker around the edges with stuff, but if you don't also change what you value to make people feel more like their achievements have been recognised and have been celebrated, then you're not doing very much. And so there's some of that, to me, sits well outside the exam system and is actually about
celebrating the success of all pupils.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And not just celebrating the success of those who do really well in formal end of year exams, which we should still be celebrating, but it's about how do we change that balance a little bit, and how do we recognise what lots of different children and young people are up to and how they are succeeding within, I guess, the context of the Inclusion Ambassador's vision statement, right, which recognises success looks different for everyone. So on that note, Lucy, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about the Success Looks Different Awards?
I'd love to. So this all started after the Inclusion Ambassadors had created their vision statement that Chris mentioned before. We got discussing with the group about how best to share their vision across Scotland. And in particular, with Success Looks Different Awards, we're really focusing on this phrase, success is different for everyone. And so talking to the group, they came up with the idea that they'd like to create an award that would be there to recognise schools who are demonstrating good practice in including, supporting and celebrating pupils with additional support needs. So in 2022, we worked with the Inclusion Ambassadors to make that idea a reality and bring the Success Looks Different Awards to life. So the awards were designed to encourage schools to share how they look beyond exam results and consider success in more than just attainment levels, which is all stuff that Chris and I have just covered, but it also is in line with the recommendations made in the ASL implementation review and the subsequent additional support for learning action plans that have been released over the last couple of years. So it started off as an idea from the Inclusion Ambassadors, and once the applications have been launched, we had more than 40 schools from different local authorities that applied to take part in the awards. And the majority of these applications came directly from schools. However, it was really great to see that there was some forms submitted by parents. There was one from a local authority, and there have been entries that have been completed by and also with pupils. So we really heard the pupil voice through all of these applications, which was just great. And we were blown away by the number of responses that we received. from different schools all across Scotland. So because there was quite a lot, the group decided to have a winner and a runner-up in each category. So I can go through the different schools that won here, and I think what's really important to note is that they really do represent different areas of Scotland, and I think that was a great way to show that the vision statement is working in reality in schools. So with the primary category, we had Braehead Primary School in Stirling, which I was very, very lucky to go and visit and meet some of the pupils and meet the teachers there. It was great. And then there was the runner-up school for the primary category was Whitecrook. I think, Chris, you went there, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. It was great. It was really nice. It was the first primary school I think actually I'd been in person since possibly pre-pandemic. And it was really nice just to be like sat on the floor. I think we were in the dining hall, just sat in a circle, kind of chatting to people from the school about what made it a really, what made it, I guess, an inclusive environment for them and why they liked to be there. So yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah. It was such a good opportunity. And then I got to go to Alva Academy, who were the winner in the secondary school category. And much like Chris was just saying there, it was fantastic. I walked in, there was a real celebration going on about winning this award. There was a balloon arch, there was music playing, there were parents and members of the community there to celebrate with the school. And it really was just great to be part of that and to know that it was well deserved. We then had the runner-up in the secondary school category was Hill Park Secondary School in Glasgow. And then the final category we had was the special school winner. Then we had Cedarbank School in West Lothian, and also the runner-up, which was Harmony Education Trust in Edinburgh, which again was a really interesting place to go and visit and see a completely different way of how success is celebrated in the school and how they celebrated being the runner-up of the Success Looks Different award this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really nice to be able to see all those examples of really good practice, wasn't it? I think with the inclusion ambassadors, but also certainly, from discussions, Lucy, that you and I have, and we have with colleagues at Enquire and what you hear through Reach as well, is that we do hear quite a lot of negative stuff, right? And we've spoken a lot about some of the challenges, I guess, that young people with additional support needs face within the exams and assessment system. And what I've found really positive and rewarding, I guess, about that piece of work has been then identifying those examples of good practice and showing that there is really good work going on all across Scotland, that there are teachers and schools who are supporting children and young people really well, who are realising their rights and who are providing a sort of a positive and nurturing environment. And I think it's really important to reflect that. And we are going to have some case studies, I guess, from these different schools coming out. So I would encourage everybody to go and read that, to have a look at some examples that they can reflect on. But I think, just thinking back to what we were talking about exams and assessments, all of this shows that there are ways to recognise different things that are working for people that aren't in the formal exam system, but that are still really valued by children and young people. Mm-hmm. But it does take some thought to get that right and to ensure that people are bought into it. As part of all this process as well, Lucy, we have, as you say, we've got that case study document coming out, but we've also identified, I guess, some kind of key learning from things that have worked across all those kind of winning and runner-up schools. I guess, do you want to, what I guess were some of those key themes for you? What was the key learning from Success Looks Different, and how can we ensure that we realise that, or realise that vision that success looks different for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely themes that emerged across all of the schools that applied, regardless of whether they won the award or not. And I think what was really great to see is there was these emerging themes, but they really matched up with the success criteria that the inclusion ambassadors identified as the criteria for the winning schools. So I'll just pick up, there was quite a few, but I'll just pick out some of the key ones that were sort of the most standout ones. And to start with, I think we can just say that individualizing the celebration of success was a massive one. The examples of good relationships were incredible. It's incredible to see the positive impact that good relationships have on pupils with additional support needs. Knowing the pupils and involving them in how they want to celebrate their success has such a huge impact on their self-esteem, as well as the relationships they have with others within the school. So I think that's the first main one. The other one that the inclusion ambassadors were particularly keen to sort of celebrate is creativity and innovation. I think we've touched on a little bit already about sometimes how exams and assessments can feel like quite a traditional thing. They feel like something that is kind of rooted in education experiences for not just children at school at the moment, but for adults, and we've all been through it. And I think some of the standout applications that we had was schools thinking differently and thinking creatively about how you can celebrate other pupils. So that might be being creative and including the whole school in finding ways to celebrate different types of success, or it was more child-led celebrations and more sort of crossover between the two. So there was so many great examples, but I think being innovative in the approach was a really important one. And I think another important one that came up was sort of a positive communication with parents, carers, and families. I know at Enquire we spend a lot of time really thinking about how schools and children, young people and families can really connect to ensure that the children in question are getting the best support they possibly can. But this was another way of looking at it. So we really found that the impact of contacting home, for example, to celebrate a success rather than to call up and discuss something negative was evidenced in a number of entries, and it was a really positive way of celebrating success. And it sort of was building communication between schools and families for a really positive reason. And I think maybe the last one, just to touch on briefly, was sort of meaningful and inclusive awareness raising events. So I would say pretty much the majority of schools that applied had some examples of how they would be raising awareness about particular areas of additional support for learning. And some of the most successful examples we saw was schools that were giving all pupils, not just pupils with additional support needs, but all pupils the time and space to learn about additional support needs, which then was feeding into a more inclusive learning environment for all. So really celebrating the different ways that the members of that school community learn and live their lives. And it was, I think, as Chris has said there, I think all the themes that emerged were very positive. It was a real pleasure to sort of see these positive themes about celebrating success come out of these different applications that we got.
Yeah, and I think for me, Lucy, that point about creating inclusive environments is kind of almost at the heart of this, right? Is that
Definitely
that we can create environments where children and young people learn, where they feel respected, where they feel seen, and where they feel recognised. But it does mean that we do need to put some work of doing things outside of those kind of, almost, as you said, the more traditional methods of celebrating that people that still sit within our system, sit within the formal exams and assessment system. And I guess that's what we're hoping to get from those awards and from the document that we'll be sharing, is that to provide, I guess, some examples that people can learn from, and that people can take into their own practice. But also, I guess, building on that point that you said at the start, that actually individualism is really, or individual approaches are really important, because what works for one child or one young person in one context may not work for others. And so it's really important to develop those. But I also think the other point is that we know that all of this, I guess, supports people. From what we've seen, people feel better about the school that they're in if it creates this environment for them, right? So this is not just like a nice extra to make people feel good. It's something that really supports people to feel more like I think, as I've already said, respected and seen member of the school community, and subsequently more part of that. And that can only be a positive thing, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, just to finish up on that point, is something you touched on before. It's not to say that celebrating the success of all pupils out with exams would take away from the celebration of those pupils who have sat exams and done really well at them. It's actually about making all those pupils feel more included and creating this more inclusive learning environment for all pupils, regardless of whether you have additional support needs or not. We've spoken a lot about the Inclusion Ambassadors' work in this area, but this feeds into policy that we do as an organisation. So what are we saying actually needs to change in this area?
So I think, Lucy, that's a really important question, actually, just for us to end on, because obviously we've spoken a lot about the participation element that we do with the group and ensuring that children and young people's views are heard. But there is a huge part of realising or taking their views and ensuring they're heard is then us feeding that into decision makers. And so we've contributed this through a number of routes. So we have contributed to the consultation as an organisation that's on Professor Hayward's review. We have also submitted a sort of a short summary of the Inclusion Ambassador's view directly to the team responsible for that review and submitted that to the consultation. And it also fed into a wider briefing paper that we produced on the back of the national discussion on Scottish education that's underway at the moment. And I think the starting point for this is that all of this is an opportunity. You know, the reason that we're talking about this and that we're doing this podcast is that there is an opportunity for real change to the exam system. Mm-hmm. We've spoken a lot about what the issues are, and we've spoken a lot about actually how you can do things within schools a bit differently, to be more inclusive and to celebrate different forms of success. And children and young people have been calling for this for a long time. It's not just the Inclusion Ambassadors. I've done work with Changing Our World, Children in Scotland's advisory group on this. I know that other organisations have spoken with the young people that they work with as well. So what children and young people want is really well known. And so it's really important, I think, then that the people leading this review and then the people that will be involved in actually delivering that change are really brave in taking things forward. I think there needs to be an actual commitment to change, because we know that what's happening at the moment and the way this exams and assessment system is delivered doesn't work for all children and young people. It doesn't, as we've spoken about, there are lots of ways it doesn't work for children and young people with additional support needs, but we know what doesn't work well for lots of other children and young people who don't access additional support within school as well. So I guess what we're actually calling for and needs to change is really built on everything that we've spoken about today. We need to have more rights-based approaches to the qualifications and assessment. And this needs to be based really strongly in the experiences of children and young people. And it needs to lead to more person-led approaches to this. So we have spoken about flexibility in the assessment system. So I think one of the key things that we need to do is move away from a culture of high-stakes assessment through all phases of education. So that's at the end, sort of within your hires and within your Nat5s, but also other stages of education as well. And we need to then start to embed more holistic, sort of flexible approaches to that, where young people have a chance to identify what the best way for them to share their progress is. And for some, that might be an end-of-year exam, but for others, it's going to be more ongoing approaches. For others, it might be sharing stuff in less traditional ways that sometimes aren't fully recognised within the exam system. So I think that's number one, is we need to get away from that high stakes element and move to more sort of holistic and flexible approaches for people. The second bit that we've been calling for is really directly linked to everything that you spoke about really well about the Success Looks Different awards. And we need to increase recognition and celebration of achievement outside of the current assessment system. So at the moment, as we have spoken about quite a lot today, there is still too much focus on those formal end-of-year exams. And I think we need to get to a position where we celebrate all the different things that children and young people do throughout school, and do that meaningfully as well. It can't become a kind of tick box and an add-on to the exam system, because that's just going to create a feeling, I guess, of a two-tier system. It needs to be a built-in, recognised and understood part of school life and just part of being in school. And we know that will benefit a lot of the young people whose experiences we're drawing on today. We know that will benefit them really well and allow them to celebrate and share all the things that they are good at. And I think lastly, this is kind of as much about the process and links to other stuff about Scottish education as well. But we need to have a sort of the review process as that goes forward, and the governance to whatever comes next has to have co-design sort of baked into it. So that's all stakeholders, right? That's schools, that's parents and carers, but fundamentally has to involve children and young people meaningfully as well. They are the key stakeholder. They are the person they are the people who access education in Scotland. They're the ones who are experiencing the exams. And so the bodies that are, involved in delivering those need to have children and young people's views baked into how they work. That can't be an add-on. It can't be a thing of, we'd better go and ask some children and young people. Their structures and processes need to have that built into them. And that will allow us to achieve a system which is just much more reflective of children and young people who are going through that process just now. And I think a key part of that as well almost banging our inclusion ambassadors drum again for one last time, is that process also needs to be inclusive. That co-design work, it can't just be, it has to be a representative group of children and young people who have different experiences of exams, who live in different areas, who have different skills and interests and come from different backgrounds, because otherwise we're not getting a clear picture of what is needed. But yeah, we have highlighted all this through a number of different areas. We'll be continuing to engage with Scottish Government with the independent review about it, and we'll be continuing, I guess, to work with children and young people on that as well, and continuing to push for these, what I think are really important changes that could be made.
And I think just to add on to that, just to say that you can find out more about the Inclusion Ambassadors on the Children in Scotland website. They also have a space on reach.scot. The links will be in the description. And we've mentioned quite a few times throughout us talking today that we've created this document sharing the findings from the Success Looks Different award for this year. So that will be shared as well. And it's really worthwhile having a read if it is something that you're interested in. And as always, we're always on the lookout to get more people involved in the Inclusion Ambassadors Network. And we have a number of resources that can help support you do this. And we are happy to answer any questions. So feel free to email either me or Chris about the Inclusion Ambassadors or anything you have heard today whilst Chris and I have been chatting. But I think the only thing left to say is thank you so much for listening, and we hope that you have found some of this information useful.
Just echo that, Lucy. Thanks very much, everybody, for listening. And Lucy, thanks very much for taking the time to chat about it today. It's been great.
Thank you, Chris.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Children in Scotland podcast. To find out more about our work, including the work of the Inclusion Ambassadors, head to our website at childreninscotland.org.uk.